The shriek of the klaxon at 0347 hours punched through my skull like a drill bit, and in that half-second between sleep and consciousness, I knew something had gone catastrophically wrong. Captain Jensen was already at the commander's console when I rolled out of my bunk, her face illuminated by the pulsing red advisory lights that had turned our capsule into a nightmare disco. "Trent, get your ass over here right now," she barked. I'd served 3 tours in Iraq before volunteering for nuclear duty. Survived 2 IED strikes and a firefight in Fallujah that left half my platoon in body bags, but nothing had ever made Captain Sarah Jensen sound like that. Lima 9 was one of 15 launch control capsules scattered across the frozen wasteland of North Dakota, each one responsible for 10 Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missiles buried in silos across 8,500 square miles of prairie. We were 60 feet underground in a steel-reinforced concrete egg suspended on massive shock absorbers, designed to survive a direct nuclear strike and still maintain launch capability. The isolation was absolute. 2 officers, 4 blast doors, 1 secure elevator shaft, and enough provisions to survive down here for 30 days if the world above turned to radioactive glass. My shift partner and I had been stationed here for 6 months, pulling 24-hour alerts in this tomb every 3rd day, and the routine had become almost meditative. Check the systems, run diagnostics, eat our prepackaged meals, sleep in shifts, and pray the red phone never rang with launch codes from Stratcom. "All 10 of our birds just went to prep status simultaneously," Jensen said, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she pulled up system logs that made no goddamn sense. Prep status meant the missiles were running through their pre-launch sequence, gyroscopes spinning up, guidance systems initializing, fuel pressurization beginning. It was impossible. You couldn't accidentally trigger prep status. It required 2 physical keys turned simultaneously, 16 feet apart, held for 5 seconds, followed by a 6-digit alphanumeric code that changed every 8 hours and was only transmitted via encrypted emergency action message from Strategic Command. I didn't touch anything, Trent. I was running a routine diagnostic on Echo 7's environmental controls when every single board lit up like Christmas. I slid into my seat at the deputy commander's console and felt my stomach drop as I saw the impossible data streaming across my screens. Not only were all 10 missiles in prep status, but the sequence was progressing on its own. Guidance updates downloading, target packages loading, everything moving toward launch readiness with the mechanical precision of an automated doomsday clock. "Jesus Christ, we need to abort this right fucking now," I said, reaching for the emergency safing procedures. My hands were steady, years of training kicking in, but my mind was racing through scenarios. Equipment malfunction? Impossible. Not across 10 separate silos simultaneously. Cyber attack? We were air-gapped from any external network. No internet connection. No wireless anything. Someone topside fucking with us? The security response team would have detected any intrusion attempt before it reached the blast doors. That's when I noticed the date timestamp on the launch sequence initialization. March 15th, 1979, at 15:23 hours. 30 years ago to the day, almost to the minute. "Sarah, look at this timestamp. This isn't a malfunction. Someone loaded a historical training scenario into our live systems. But even as I said it, I knew that was impossible. Training scenarios ran on completely separate, isolated computers. There was no physical connection between our simulation systems and the actual launch control infrastructure. It was like finding your kitchen stove somehow running software from a calculator. The hardware couldn't even communicate. Jensen initiated the emergency abort sequence, her key already in the lock, waiting for me to turn mine simultaneously. On my mark, 3, 2, 1, turn. We rotated our keys in perfect synchronization, the way we'd practiced 100 times in training and twice in real-world tests. Nothing happened. The missiles stayed in prep status, countdown timers ticking down with mathematical indifference to our commands. She tried again. Still nothing. "This is impossible," she whispered. "The physical interlock should prevent any launch sequence unless we both authorize it. We just proved we're not authorizing it, so the system should automatically abort." I grabbed the red phone that connected us directly to the Missile Operations Center at Minot Air Force Base, but the line was dead. Not busy, not ringing, completely silent, like the other end had been disconnected, or the entire base had ceased to exist. "Landline's down," I reported, feeling the first tendrils of real panic creeping into my chest. We had backup communications, satellite phone, radio, even a goddamn pneumatic tube system from the Cold War era that could physically shoot message capsules up the elevator shaft. I tried them all. Every single communication method was dead, and we were alone 60 feet underground with 10 nuclear missiles counting down to launch, unable to stop them, unable to call for help, unable to do anything but watch. Then the temperature dropped. Dropped. From our normal 68 degrees to what felt like 40 degrees in the span of maybe 10 seconds. My breath came out in visible clouds, and frost started forming on the metal surfaces of our consoles. Environmental systems failure? I suggested. But Jensen was already checking those readings, and according to our instruments, the temperature was still 68 degrees, humidity at 40%, all systems nominal. My body was screaming that we were in a fucking meat locker, but the computers insisted everything was fine. That's when I heard it. The sound of someone else breathing in our capsule, slow and raspy. The wet rattle of damaged lungs struggling to pull in air. We both spun around, and there was a man standing near the blast door, wearing a Cold War-era Air Force uniform that looked like it belonged in a museum. Major's oak leaves on his shoulders, name tag reading Kessler, and his face. Jesus Christ, his face was wrong. Gray skin, eyes that didn't quite focus, lips tinged blue like he'd been dead for days. But he was moving, shifting his weight from foot to foot, his chest rising and falling with those horrible, rattling breaths. "This is Lima 9, he said, his voice like gravel scraping against concrete. "Launch sequence initiated. Target package Moscow. Authorization Delta Whiskey 7 November. Please confirm you are ready to turn your keys, Captain." Jensen had her service pistol out before I could even process what I was seeing. A Beretta M9 that we were required to carry at all times in case of... what? Intruders? The security protocols assumed any unauthorized person in the capsule was a hostile attempting to seize control of nuclear weapons. "Identify yourself," she shouted, her voice cracking slightly. "How the fuck did you get in here? The capsule is sealed." But Major Kessler, if that's what he really was, just tilted his head at an unnatural angle, like a bird studying something it didn't quite understand. "I've always been here, Captain Jensen. Just like you'll always be here long after they pull your body out of this hole in the ground." That's when Jensen fired 3 rounds center mass, the gunshots deafening in the confined space of our capsule. I watched the bullets hit him, saw his uniform ripple with the impacts, saw the muzzle flash illuminate him like a freeze-frame photograph, and then he was just gone. Not falling, not bleeding, just instantly not there anymore, like someone had hit the delete button on his existence. The temperature snapped back to normal, my breath no longer visible, the frost evaporating from the consoles as if it had never existed. Jensen and I stared at each other, and I could see my own terror reflected in her eyes. "What the fuck was that?" I managed to choke out. My hands were shaking now, training completely abandoned, because nothing in 8 years of military service had prepared me for a dead man appearing in a sealed capsule, 60 feet underground. Jensen slowly lowered her pistol, checking the magazine. 3 rounds fired, 12 remaining. Physical proof that what we'd just experienced had been real, or at least real enough to expend ammunition on. "I don't know," she said quietly, "but those missiles are still in prep status, and we've lost 90 seconds off the countdown. If we can't abort this sequence, in 43 minutes, 10 nuclear warheads are going to launch toward targets we can't even identify." I forced myself to focus on the immediate tactical problem. Stop the launch. I pulled up the diagnostic interface and started tracing through the system logs, looking for any kind of exploit or corruption that could explain the unauthorized sequence. The code was clean. Too clean, actually. Every checksum validated perfectly. Every authorization looked legitimate. Timestamps and digital signatures all correct for 1979. It was as if someone had reached 30 years into the past, copied an authentic launch order from March 15, 1979, and pasted it into our present-day systems. But that date kept nagging at me, tickling something in the back of my memory from our facility briefings. "Sarah, wasn't there an incident here in 79? I remember something in the historical records during our onboarding." She thought for a moment. Then her face went pale. "The Kessler incident. March 15, 1979. Major David Kessler and his deputy, Captain Ramirez, were on alert when they reported a credible launch order from NOCOM. They initiated the sequence, got all the way to key turn, And then Kessler realized the order was fraudulent. Someone had penetrated communications and was trying to trigger an unauthorized launch. He aborted it with 17 seconds to spare, but the stress killed him. Massive coronary, dead before the security team could get down here. They found him slumped over his console, and Ramirez completely catatonic, wouldn't speak for 3 weeks. The implications hit me like a freight train. We were experiencing what Kessler had experienced, on the exact anniversary, with him appearing to us like some kind of time-displaced ghost. "What if it's not a haunting?" I said slowly. "What if something about that incident created a loop? A temporal echo? What if we're seeing a recording of that day, but somehow the recording is interfacing with our actual systems?" It sounded insane, but we were way past rational explanations. We had 10 nuclear missiles counting down to launch because of a launch order from 30 years ago, and a dead officer had just materialized in our capsule. Jensen was already pulling up the classified after-action report from 1979, her security clearance giving her access to documents that were still sealed from public record. She read in silence for maybe 30 seconds, her face growing progressively more disturbed. "Trent, according to this report, they never figured out how the false launch order penetrated their communications. It wasn't a hack, wasn't a transmission error, wasn't human error. The investigators concluded that the launch authorization appeared spontaneously in the system, as if the computers had simply decided on their own to start World War III. And here's the really fucked up part. When they examined Kessler's body, they found anomalous electrical activity in his brain tissue. He'd been dead for 6 hours, but his neurons were still firing in patterns they'd never seen before. The capsule suddenly jerked, a violent shudder that threw both of us against our restraints, and I heard the unmistakable groan of metal under extreme stress. "Was that an earthquake?" Jensen demanded. But North Dakota wasn't seismically active. We were sitting on some of the most geologically stable crust on the planet. Then it happened again, harder this time, and I felt the entire capsule tilt slightly to the left, the shock absorbers screaming in protest. Something was physically moving our capsule, something strong enough to shift 200 tons of steel and concrete suspended in a web of shock-absorbing cables. The lights flickered and went out completely, plunging us into absolute darkness for maybe 3 seconds before the emergency lighting kicked in. Dull red bulbs that barely pushed back the shadows and made everything look like we were swimming in blood. "Emergency power only," I reported, checking the electrical systems. "Main power supply just dropped offline. Generators should kick in." But it didn't. We were running on battery backup, which gave us maybe 2 hours of minimal systems before everything went dark permanently. And in that red emergency lighting, I saw Major Kessler standing exactly where he'd been before, watching us with those dead, unfocused eyes. This time he wasn't alone. There was another figure beside him, a captain, Hispanic features, name tag reading Ramirez. And this one looked even worse. Where Kessler at least maintained some semblance of human posture, Ramirez was bent at an impossible angle, his spine curved in a way that suggested it had been broken and healed wrong, or maybe never healed at all. His hands were clawed, fingers twisted, and when he opened his mouth, no sound came out. Just a silent scream that I could somehow hear in my bones rather than my ears. "They want us to finish it," Jensen whispered, and I realized she was right. Kessler was staring at the keys, at the launch controls, with an intensity that transcended death. He aborted the launch in '79 and it killed him. Maybe that was the wrong choice? Maybe whatever we're dealing with here needs that launch to happen, needs those missiles to fly, and it's been waiting 30 years for another crew to complete what Kessler started? The logic was insane, but we were operating in a space where normal logic had been violently murdered and stuffed in a shallow grave. I checked the countdown. 37 minutes until launch. My training said to follow established procedures, run through every emergency protocol until we found one that worked. But my gut, the same instinct that had kept me alive in Fallujah when every logical decision pointed toward walking into an ambush, was screaming that we needed to understand what was really happening here before we could stop it. "Sarah, the after-action report. Did it say anything about what the target was in '79? Where were those missiles supposed to hit?" She scrolled through the document, eyes scanning classified paragraphs. Target package. Jesus Christ, Trent. The targets weren't Moscow or Beijing or any legitimate strategic site. According to this, the missiles were being retargeted to coordinates in central Alaska, northern Canada, and Siberia, remote locations with no military or civilian value whatsoever. The investigation concluded it was proof the order was fraudulent, because no rational nuclear strategy would waste ICBMs on empty wilderness. She looked up at me, and I saw understanding dawning in her eyes at the same time it hit me. What if those weren't empty targets? I said slowly. What if there was something at those locations that someone or something wanted destroyed badly enough to hijack America's nuclear arsenal to do it? It sounded like the premise of a bad science fiction movie, but we were sitting in a capsule being haunted by dead missile men who'd been killed trying to stop a launch that made no strategic sense. Pull up the coordinates, I ordered. I want to see exactly where those missiles were supposed to hit. Jensen plotted the target coordinates on our mapping system, and we both stared at the result. The 7 targets formed a perfect geometric pattern, a heptagon with each point located in some of the most isolated, inhospitable terrain on the planet. Northern Alaska above the Arctic Circle, northwestern Canadian territories, eastern Siberia. The center point of the heptagon was in the Arctic Ocean, roughly at the North Pole. That's not random, Jensen said. That's deliberate. Someone chose those locations based on their geographic relationship to each other. The capsule shuddered again, harder this time, and I heard something that stopped my heart. The sound of the blast door locking mechanism cycling open. The massive steel door that sealed us in this capsule, the door that required 3 separate authentication procedures to unlock, was opening on its own. Jensen immediately moved to the door, pistol raised, but when it swung wide on its hydraulic hinges, there was nothing there. Just the short corridor leading to the elevator shaft, dimly illuminated by emergency lighting, empty and silent. But the cold came pouring through that open door like water from a broken dam, and this time it brought sound with it. Voices, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all whispering in languages I couldn't identify. The temperature gauge that had insisted everything was normal now showed 40 degrees and dropping, but the cold came pouring through that open door like water from a broken dam, and this time it brought sound with it. Voices, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all whispering in languages I couldn't identify. The temperature gauge that had insisted everything was normal now showed 40 degrees and dropping, and I watched frost form on every surface in the capsule, creeping across our consoles like living crystal. My breath came out in gasping clouds, and when I tried to speak, my lips were already going numb. Through the doorway I could see them now, figures in the corridor standing in the space that should have been empty. More missile men in old uniforms, but not just from 1979. I saw uniforms from every era of the Cold War. 1960s crews with their different insignia, 1970s personnel with older equipment, even what looked like 1950s-era Strategic Air Command officers in their distinctive leather jackets. All of them dead, all of them gray-skinned and wrong, all of them staring at us with those horrible empty eyes. And standing in front of them, acting as some kind of spokesman for this army of ghosts, was Major Kessler. When he spoke this time, his voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, resonating through the very walls of the capsule. Every crew that stopped a launch, he said, becomes part of the wait. We're all here, Trent. Everyone who ever served in these holes, everyone who ever sat at those controls and chose not to turn their keys when the wrong voice told them to. We're trapped in the moment of that choice, living it over and over, and the only way to end it is to let the launch proceed. Jensen fired again, emptying her magazine into Kessler and the figures behind him. The muzzle flash illuminated the corridor in strobe light bursts, and in each flash, I saw the bullets pass through the figures like they were made of smoke. And then I saw something else. Behind the ghosts, the corridor was wrong. The walls were covered in something organic, pulsing veins of black material that looked like cables but moved like living tissue. They ran along the ceiling, down the walls, converging on our capsule like roots seeking water. "Sarah, stop firing!" I grabbed her arm. "Look behind them! Look at the walls!" She squinted into the corridor, and I saw her face transform from fear to revulsion. "What the fuck is that?" The black veins were growing as we watched, spreading across surfaces, and where they touched the metal, it corroded, not rust, but something worse, the steel turning gray and brittle like it was being aged centuries in seconds. And the veins were extending into our capsule now, reaching for the consoles. For us. I made a decision that probably violated every protocol in the book. We need to get out of this capsule right now. Jensen looked at me like I'd suggested we strip naked and dance. Are you insane? The security topside will shoot us the second we exit without authorization. Besides, we can't leave our post during a launch sequence. That's literally the one thing we're here to prevent. But I was already moving toward the door, because whatever was happening here wasn't about nuclear war or strategic deterrence or any of the things our training had prepared us for. That's when I heard the sound from above us, from the direction of the elevator shaft that connected our capsule to the surface. It was a metallic shrieking, the sound of steel cables under too much tension, followed by a thunderous crash that shook our entire capsule. "The elevator," Jensen said, her voice hollow. Something just destroyed the elevator. She was right. Our only physical connection to the surface had just been severed, and we were now truly trapped 60 feet underground, with no way up, no communications, and 10 nuclear missiles counting down to launch in 31 minutes. The ghosts, because what else could I call them, began to move, filing into our capsule in silent procession. Kessler led them, followed by Ramirez, and then dozens more, each one a missile man who'd died at their post over decades of Cold War service. Heart attacks, strokes, suicides, accidents. Every crew member who died in these holes was here, and they surrounded our consoles in a grotesque parody of a military formation. I could feel them pressing close, their presence sucking heat from the air, their whispered voices creating a dissonant chorus that wormed into my skull. Jensen had dropped her empty pistol and was backing toward her console, her hands raised in a warding gesture that looked more like prayer than self-defense. "Trent, I think I understand what this is," she said, her voice shaking. "The missiles, the entire nuclear arsenal, it's not a weapon system. It's a seal. Those coordinates from 1979, that geometric pattern. What if there's something at the center of that heptagon, something at the North Pole, that requires those 7 detonation points to remain contained? What if the nuclear arsenal wasn't built to fight the Soviets? What if it was built to keep something imprisoned?" The idea was so monumentally insane that it looped back around to making a horrific kind of sense. The Cold War, the arms race, the whole strategic doctrine of mutually assured destruction. What if it had all been theater? A cover story for the real purpose of building thousands of nuclear weapons and pointing them at seemingly random coordinates around the Arctic. But if that's true, I said slowly, then whoever, whatever, is trying to trigger this launch wants to destroy the seal, wants to free whatever is imprisoned. Kessler's ghost smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression I'd ever seen on a human face. "You're smarter than most, Lieutenant Carver. Most crews never get past thinking this is about nuclear war, but you're only partly right. We don't want to free it. We are it. Every man who died in these capsules, every soul that spent years sitting at these controls contemplating the end of human civilization, we were all infected, changed, became part of something that's been waiting under the ice since before your species learned to make fire." The black veins had reached our consoles now, and I watched in horror as they began to interface with the launch control systems. Where the organic material touched the electronics, the computers came alive with impossible code. Strings of characters that scrolled too fast to read, in languages that might not have been languages at all. The missile countdown accelerated, jumping from 30 minutes to 15 minutes in a single instant. "Sarah, we're out of time," I said. "Whatever we're going to do, we need to do it right fucking now." She was staring at her console with an expression of dawning horror. "The after-action report from 1979, she whispered. "It said Kessler aborted the launch with 17 seconds to spare, but that's not what really happened, is it? He didn't abort it. He couldn't abort it, just like we can't abort it now. The system was already compromised, already infected with this thing. So what did he really do?" I pulled up the technical specifications for the capsule's emergency systems, and there it was, buried in a subsection most crews probably never read. Each launch control capsule had a self-destruct capability, a fail-safe to prevent the facility from being captured by enemy forces. 20 pounds of C4 explosive positioned around the capsule's support structure, designed to collapse the entire installation and ensure no launch could proceed. It would kill anyone inside, but it would also sever all connections between the capsule and the missile silos. He destroyed the capsule, I said. Kessler killed himself and Ramirez to physically sever the connection to the missiles. Jensen met my eyes, and in that moment, I saw her make the same calculation I'd just made. We could activate the self-destruct, collapse the capsule, die down here in this frozen tomb, and maybe, stop the launch. Or we could refuse, try to find another way, and potentially allow 10 nuclear weapons to detonate at coordinates designed to free something that had been imprisoned for millennia. The report said Kessler died of a heart attack, she said quietly. But that was a cover story, wasn't it? They couldn't admit a missile man had deliberately destroyed a launch control capsule. That would raise too many questions. The ghosts were pressing closer now, and I could feel their presence like physical weight, crushing the air from my lungs. Kessler's voice echoed through my skull. "You can't stop this with explosives, Lieutenant. We tried that. All it did was delay us, trap us here in this moment, force us to wait for another crew, another chance. The missiles must launch, the seal must be broken, what waits beneath the ice must be freed, and when it rises, your species will finally understand what you were really created for." I looked at the countdown, 11 minutes, and then at Jensen. I don't think we can trust anything we're being told. Not by the ghosts, not by the after-action reports, not even by our own instruments. But I know one thing. I didn't spend 8 years in the military, didn't survive 3 tours in Iraq, didn't volunteer for this godforsaken posting just to let some eldritch bullshit take over my body and use me to start the apocalypse. I moved to the emergency panel that controlled the self-destruct system. Jensen was right beside me. Agreed. If we're going down fighting. The self-destruct required both of us, just like the launch sequence. 2 keys, turned simultaneously, followed by a 6-digit code. But unlike the launch abort, which had failed, the self-destruct was a purely mechanical system with no computer interface for the black veins to corrupt. It was literally a circuit completion that would send electrical current to the C4 charges. Simple physics and chemistry that couldn't be hacked or influenced by whatever reality-bending force we were dealing with. We inserted our keys. Kessler's ghost let out a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been a scream, and the temperature dropped so low that I felt ice forming in my lungs with each breath. The other ghosts surged forward, dozens of translucent figures reaching for us with clawed hands, and I felt them pass through my body, a sensation like being dipped in liquid nitrogen, every nerve ending screaming in agony as they tried to inhabit me, possess me, stop me from turning that key. "On my mark," Jensen gasped, her face blue with cold, frost forming on her eyelashes. 3, 2, 1, turn. We rotated our keys, and I felt the satisfying click of the mechanical interlock releasing. The 6-digit code scrolled across a small LED display. We had 10 seconds to enter it before the system auto-locked. My fingers were so numb I could barely feel the keypad, but I punched in the numbers while Jensen did the same at her station. 749236. Nothing happened. The LED display just blinked error and reset the countdown. 10 seconds to enter the code again. We tried. Error. Again. Error. "It's not accepting the code," Jensen shouted over the rising shriek of the ghosts. The system is supposed to be purely mechanical. There's no computer interface, nothing to corrupt. But somehow it's still rejecting valid authentication. We were standing at the edge of oblivion, our last option failing, and the missile countdown showed 8 minutes remaining. That's when I saw movement from the corridor. Not the ghosts, but something else. A figure in modern Air Force uniform, moving with purpose, heading straight for our capsule. For a moment I thought it was a rescue team, that somehow someone topside had realized what was happening and sent help. But as the figure came into the emergency lighting, I saw his face and my blood turned to ice for a completely different reason. It was me. Not a ghost, not some translucent echo, but a perfect duplicate of Lieutenant Trent Carver, wearing the exact same uniform I was wearing, down to the coffee stain on my left sleeve from this morning's briefing. The other me smiled, and it was my smile, my face, but the expression behind it was utterly alien. "Hello, Trent," my doppelganger said in my voice. "We've been waiting for you to reach this point. Did you really think you were still the original? That consciousness that went to sleep before your shift tonight, that person died in his bunk. I'm what woke up in his place." Jensen spun to look at me, the real me, and I saw doubt flash across her face. How could she possibly know which version was real? The other me continued speaking, moving into the capsule with casual confidence. "Every crew member who serves in these facilities is slowly replaced. It takes about 6 months of exposure, living at the intersection of nuclear fire and ancient ice, breathing the recycled air that's been circulating through these holes since the Cold War. By the end of your posting, you're one of us. You belong to what waits below." I looked down at my hands and saw, with mounting horror, that there were black veins running under my skin. Faint, almost invisible, but definitely there. They branched from my wrists up my forearms, following my circulatory system, and when I concentrated, I could feel them pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. "No," I whispered. "No, that's not possible. I'm still me. I'm still..." But was I? How would I even know if I'd been replaced? Would the replacement have all my memories, all my thoughts, believe itself to be the original? Jensen backed away from both of us, her empty pistol raised despite having no ammunition left. "Trent, whichever one of you is real, we need to focus. 6 minutes until launch. Even if we're all infected or replaced or whatever the fuck is happening, we're still Air Force officers, and we still have a duty to protect American citizens from nuclear detonation." Her voice was steady, professional, falling back on training because training was the only solid ground left. My doppelganger laughed. "You still think this is about protecting America? The United States government has known about the entity beneath the Arctic since 1952. Project Deep Freeze wasn't about Antarctic exploration. It was about confirming that the same type of entity exists at both poles, that Earth is imprisoned between 2 anchoring points. Every nuclear weapon, every missile silo, every Cold War bunker, they were all built on locations where the entity's influence is strongest, using the radiation as a kind of cage. You're not defending your country, Captain Jensen. You're maintaining a prison, and you've been doing it without even knowing you're the warden." The countdown hit 5 minutes, and the entire capsule shuddered as the missiles began their final preparation sequence. I could feel it through the floor, through the walls, a thrumming vibration as 10 Minuteman III ICBMs powered up their rocket engines, as guidance systems locked onto targets that would destroy the very cage my doppelganger was describing. Jensen grabbed my arm, the real me, or what I desperately hoped was the real me. "The truth doesn't matter right now. All that matters is stopping those launches. If we can't use the self-destruct, we need to physically destroy the launch control systems." She was right. I pulled the fire axe from its emergency mount on the wall. Every capsule had one, a holdover from Cold War paranoia about being trapped by fire, and moved toward the main power distribution panel. If I could destroy the electrical connections between the capsule and the missile silos, sever the physical cables that carried launch authorization signals, maybe we could stop this. My doppelganger made no move to stop me. He just stood there smiling, like I was a child attempting something adorable and futile. I swung the axe into the panel with all my strength, and the blade bit through the steel housing with a satisfying crunch. Sparks flew as I severed power connections, and several of the launch control displays flickered and died. But the main countdown continued unabated, the numbers ticking down on a display that seemed to be running on its own internal power source that had nothing to do with the capsule's electrical systems. 3 minutes, 30 seconds. "You can't stop it with violence," my doppelganger said calmly. "The launch exists in multiple states simultaneously. It's both happening and not happening, both in 1979 and today, both real and metaphorical. The only way to truly prevent it is to complete it, to let the missiles fly and fulfill their purpose. When the seal breaks, when the entity rises, You'll understand. You'll all understand. This is liberation, not apocalypse." Jensen had moved to her console and was frantically typing commands, trying to access the missile guidance systems. "Trent, I'm going to reprogram the missiles. If we can't stop the launch, we can change the targets. Point them at empty ocean, uninhabited islands, places where the detonation won't trigger whatever this thing wants." It was a desperate plan, probably impossible given how thoroughly the systems were compromised, but it was something, action instead of paralysis. 2 minutes. I joined her at the console, adding my authentication to her targeting override request. The system fought us every step of the way, rejecting our commands, reverting changes as fast as we could make them. But slowly, painfully, we began to shift the target coordinates. Not much, just a few degrees, but enough to move the impact points away from the precise geometric pattern that supposedly maintained the seal. That's when Kessler's ghost spoke directly into my mind, bypassing my ears entirely. "You think you're the first crew to try this? The targeting is quantum-locked across timelines. Every attempt to change it only strengthens the original pattern. The missiles are already at their destinations, already have been there since the moment the first nuclear weapon was created. Time is not what you think it is, Lieutenant. Causality flows in directions your physics hasn't begun to map." 1 minute. Jensen's hands were bleeding from where she'd slammed them against the console in frustration, leaving red smears on the keys. My doppelganger was standing directly behind us now, and I could feel his cold breath on the back of my neck. "Let go," he whispered. "Accept what you're becoming. The original Trent Carver is gone, has been gone for months. You're the chrysalis version, the transitional form. When the entity rises, you'll metamorphose into something beautiful." 30 seconds. The capsule was shaking violently now, the shock absorbers screaming, and I realized with absolute certainty that we were going to fail. The missiles were going to launch, the seal was going to break, and whatever waited beneath the Arctic was going to rise. But in that moment of acceptance, I saw something else. A detail in the historical record that Jensen had pulled up earlier. "Sarah, the report said Kessler died of a coronary, but his neurons were still firing 6 hours later. What if that's the key? What if the entity doesn't just infect living tissue? What if it can't let go of dead tissue? What if dying with the launch sequence incomplete traps it, forces it to wait for another cycle?" 10 seconds. Jensen understood immediately. She pulled a backup pistol from her ankle holster. The one we all carried but never talked about. The one that wasn't in any official inventory. "Together?" she asked. I nodded. We turned away from the consoles, away from the countdown that had reached 5 seconds, away from my doppelganger and the army of ghosts and the black veins crawling across every surface. 3 seconds. We pressed the pistols to each other's temples, both of us squeezing triggers simultaneously. Because if we were going to die, we were going to do it on our terms, not as puppets for some eldritch horror. 2 seconds. I saw my doppelganger's face transform from confidence to rage. 1 second. I felt Jensen's finger tighten on the trigger, felt my own finger doing the same, felt the moment stretch out into infinity as the missiles ignited and began their ascent from their silos. 0. The guns clicked empty, no bullets. The magazines we'd both felt, that had weight and substance, were somehow empty, had always been empty, would always be empty in this place where time was broken and causality was just a suggestion. The missiles launched, and I felt them rising through 60 feet of concrete and soil, felt them breaking through into the sky above North Dakota, felt them orienting toward their targets with mathematical precision. But something was wrong. The ghosts were screaming, not in triumph, but in agony. Kessler's form was flickering, breaking apart into static, and my doppelganger was clawing at his own face, leaving gouges that revealed not flesh underneath but something like television snow, like he was a projection losing coherence. "What did you do?" he shrieked. "What did you do?" Jensen was staring at the launch display with an expression of stunned realization. "The missiles, they're not following the programmed trajectory. The guidance systems are corrupted by the black veins, but that corruption is making them unstable. They're deviating from course, spiraling, the navigational systems conflicting with each other because they're receiving targeting data from multiple timelines simultaneously. They're going to fail. All 10 missiles are going to fail. The capsule suddenly lurched upward, and I realized the shock absorbers were contracting, pulling us toward the surface. The elevator was somehow operational again, despite having been destroyed earlier. Or maybe it had never been destroyed. Maybe that had been another lie, another layer of deception. Kessler's ghost was fading, the other ghosts dissolving like smoke, and my doppelganger was on his knees, his form flickering between my appearance and something else, something with too many limbs and eyes in places faces shouldn't have eyes. "You haven't won," he said, his voice distorting into multiple overlapping tones. "This was just one attempt, one crew, one moment. We have infinite patience. We were old when your son was young. We'll be here long after your species is cosmic dust. Every crew that comes after you will face this choice again, and eventually, one of them will make the choice we need them to make." The capsule broke through to the surface, emergency hydraulics lowering us into the cold North Dakota dawn. The security team was there, weapons drawn, medical personnel rushing forward, and everything looked normal. Looked like a standard emergency evacuation, but I saw the black veins on the lead security officer's neck, partially hidden by his collar. I saw them on the medic who took Jensen's arm to check her vitals. I saw them on the base commander who came striding across the frozen ground to demand an explanation. Jensen and I locked eyes, and I knew she'd seen them too. We'd stopped the launch, saved the world from 10 nuclear detonations at coordinates that might have freed something terrible. But we were surrounded by people who'd been infected, replaced, changed by years of service at facilities like this. How long until we were like them? How long until the entity made another attempt? The base commander was speaking, but I wasn't listening. I was watching the sky, watching for any sign of the missiles we'd launched and lost, watching for whatever might come next. Because my doppelganger had been right about one thing. This wasn't over. Whatever waited beneath the Arctic wasn't going to give up. It would try again, and again, and again, with infinite patience and infinite variations, until it found the crew that would finally complete its purpose. They took us to the base hospital, standard protocol after a traumatic incident. They asked questions we couldn't really answer. They ran medical tests that showed we were physically fine, mentally stable, fit to return to duty after a mandatory psychological evaluation. But I saw the way the evaluating physician's hands shook slightly when she examined the black veins under my skin. Veins that her instruments insisted weren't there, that her rational mind refused to acknowledge. That night, alone in my quarters, I pulled up the historical records for Lima 9 and started searching. I found Kessler's incident in 1979. Then I found another similar incident in 1987, and another in 1994, and 2003. Every 6 to 8 years, always in March, always at Lima 9 specifically, a crew would report system anomalies and unauthorized launch sequences that mysteriously resolved. The official explanations varied: equipment malfunction, crew fatigue, training scenario errors. But the pattern was undeniable. I also found something else. Lima 9 wasn't the only facility with this pattern. Every launch control capsule that sat on one of those specific coordinates, the ones that formed geometric patterns around the Arctic, had similar incidents. Hundreds of them, going back to the very beginning of the ICBM program. And the crews involved, the ones who successfully stopped the unauthorized launches, they all eventually left the service early. Medical discharge, psychological discharge, one officer who simply walked off the base and was never found. Jensen messaged me that same night. A single line. "I'm seeing them in my dreams, all the ghosts, all the versions of us that failed." I knew what she meant, because I was seeing them too. Seeing the timeline where we'd turned our keys, where the missiles had hit their targets, where something vast and ancient had risen from beneath the ice and reshaped reality into configurations human minds couldn't process. Seeing the timeline where we'd succeeded in killing ourselves, trapping our consciousness in that moment like Kessler had been trapped. Seeing infinite variations of our failure, and only this one narrow thread where we'd somehow survived. The next morning, we were both called to a meeting with a colonel neither of us had ever seen before. He arrived by helicopter from somewhere that wasn't on any official flight plan, and his security clearance was high enough that even the base commander deferred to him. He sat us down in a secure conference room, activated a white noise generator that made my teeth ache, and told us the truth. "You're not the first crew to encounter the phenomenon at Lima 9, he said, "and you won't be the last. What you experienced is real. The entity beneath the Arctic is real. The Cold War was real, but it was also cover for the construction of a global containment network. Every nuclear power participates, whether they know it or not. The weapons are aimed at each other, yes, but they're also positioned to maintain a quantum state probability field that keeps the entity locked outside our timeline." He explained that the entity exists in a state of temporal superposition. It's both imprisoned and free, both ancient and yet to be, both singular and infinite. Every attempted launch weakens the containment by introducing new probability branches where the entity might achieve its goal. But every stopped launch strengthens it by collapsing those probability branches back into the contained state. "You two did something remarkable," he said. "You stopped the launch without dying in the process. Most crews aren't that lucky." Jensen asked the question I was too afraid to voice. "What happens to us now? We're infected, aren't we? Changed. How long until we become like the others?" The colonel's expression softened slightly. "The infection, as you call it, is actually an adaptation. Exposure to the entity's influence causes human consciousness to become slightly unstable across timelines. You'll experience vivid dreams of alternate versions of yourself. You'll occasionally see things that haven't happened yet or didn't happen in this timeline. But you'll also develop a kind of immunity to the entity's manipulation. You're valuable now, rare. We need people like you." He offered us a choice: return to normal duty, accept medical retirement, or join something he called Project Sentinel, a classified program that monitored facilities like Lima 9, that responded to entity incursions, that worked to maintain the containment network. "We're not asking you to spend the rest of your lives in nuclear bunkers," he said, "but we are asking you to accept that what you saw was real, to help us develop better protocols, better training for crews who will face this in the future, and maybe eventually to help us find a permanent solution that doesn't require threatening our own extinction to keep something else locked away." Jensen and I looked at each other. I could see the black veins under her skin now, faintly visible in the fluorescent light of the conference room. Could see the way her eyes occasionally flickered with double vision, like she was seeing multiple versions of this moment simultaneously. I probably looked the same to her. We were changed, irrevocably, but we were still us, still human, still capable of making choices. "What's the permanent solution?" I asked. The colonel smiled grimly. "That's what we're trying to figure out. The entity can't fully manifest in our timeline as long as the containment network holds. But the network requires constant maintenance, constant vigilance, and humans who are willing to sit at those consoles knowing what they're really doing. The long-term goal is to find a way to permanently sever the entity from our timeline, to close the door completely. But that requires understanding something that exists outside normal physics, outside normal causality." He pulled out 2 folders, set them on the table between us. "Take the night. Think about it. If you choose to join Sentinel, report to these coordinates tomorrow at 800. If you choose medical retirement, no judgment. You've already done more than most could. You stopped an entity that's been trying to break through since before human civilization existed. That's worth something." He stood, deactivated the white noise generator, and left us alone with our impossible choice. That night, I stood outside my quarters at Minot Air Force Base, staring up at the stars. Somewhere above me, 10 missiles were falling back to Earth, their guidance systems scrambled beyond recovery, their nuclear payloads safed by automatic protocols. Tomorrow, recovery teams would find them scattered across the North Dakota prairie, and official reports would classify it as a catastrophic multiple failure event requiring complete system review. The truth would be buried under layers of classification and misdirection. But I knew the truth now. I knew that beneath the Arctic ice, something vast and hungry waited with infinite patience. I knew that I was infected with its touch, changed in ways I was only beginning to understand. I knew that Lima 9 and facilities like it weren't just relics of Cold War paranoia. They were active, necessary, part of a defensive network that had been protecting humanity from something we couldn't even properly perceive. My phone buzzed. A message from Jensen. "I'm in. Can't go back to normal life knowing what I know. You?" I stared at the message for a long moment, thinking about the choice I was making, the life I was choosing. Then I typed back, 0800. See you there. Because the alternative, pretending it hadn't happened, taking the medical retirement, trying to live a normal life while knowing that somewhere, 60 feet underground, other crews were facing the same choice we'd faced. That was impossible. We'd seen behind the curtain. We'd touched something that wasn't supposed to exist. And now we had a responsibility to make sure that when the next crew faced that impossible choice, they were better prepared than we had been. The next morning, I drove to the coordinates the colonel had provided. They led to a nondescript building on the outskirts of the base, the kind of place that looked like administrative offices, but had too much security for anything normal. Jensen was already there, looking like she'd slept as poorly as I had. We showed our IDs to guards who checked us against a list, then escorted us through corridors that descended gradually underground. The briefing room was deep enough that I felt the familiar pressure of being below the surface, but this time it felt different. Safer, somehow, like distance from the sky meant distance from whatever might be watching from above or below. There were 6 other people in the room, all with the same haunted look in their eyes, the same faint tracery of black veins visible on exposed skin. All survivors of entity encounters. All changed. All choosing to keep fighting. The colonel from yesterday stood at the front of the room, beside a screen showing a map of the Arctic with dozens of points marked in red. "Welcome to Project Sentinel," he said. "You're all here because you've survived direct contact with what we call the null entity. You've been infected, yes, but that infection grants you a unique perception, the ability to sense when the entity is making another attempt to break through. Your early warning systems, essentially. Human canaries in a cosmic coal mine." He clicked through slides showing other facilities, other crews, other incidents. Some had ended like ours, launches stopped, entity temporarily repelled. Others had ended in tragedy, entire crews lost to possession, facilities permanently decommissioned, miles of prairie turned into exclusion zones where reality itself was unstable. "Our job," the colonel continued, "is to study the entity, develop better containment protocols, and eventually find a way to sever its connection to our timeline permanently. Every encounter gives us more data, more understanding. You're not just survivors, you're researchers now." The briefing lasted 4 hours, covering decades of classified history, incident reports from facilities around the world, theories about the entity's nature and capabilities. The picture that emerged was terrifying in its scope. The Cold War had been real, but it had also been necessary. The arms race had created the infrastructure needed to contain something that had been probing at the edges of our reality since the 1940s, possibly triggered by the first atomic detonation at Trinity Site. "We think the nuclear age opened a door," one of the researchers explained. "Splitting the atom created a resonance that the entity could detect and exploit. Every nuclear detonation is like ringing a dinner bell, attracting its attention. But the containment network uses that same nuclear energy to maintain a quantum barrier. We're essentially fighting fire with fire, using the very thing that attracted the entity to keep it locked out." After the briefing, Jensen and I were assigned to a research team studying the temporal aspects of entity encounters. Our job was to document our experiences in exhaustive detail, work with theoretical physicists who were trying to model causality violations, and train new crews on recognizing the early signs of entity influence. It was strange work, part military service, part scientific research, part existential horror management. Weeks turned into months. I wrote detailed reports about every moment in Lima 9, every sensation, every perception of time distortion. I underwent brain scans that showed unusual neural activity in regions associated with temporal processing. I learned that the black veins under my skin weren't physical structures. They didn't show up on any imaging. but they were real in some other sense, visible only to others who'd been similarly infected. Jensen and I became close during this time, bonded by shared trauma and shared purpose. We'd sit up late discussing theories about the entity's nature. Was it a single, vast intelligence, or a colony of smaller ones? Had it always existed, or was it something humanity had inadvertently created? Was it malevolent, or simply so alien that its goals were incomprehensible to us? We had no answers, only endless questions. 6 months into my time with Sentinel, another incident occurred, this time at a facility in Wyoming. A crew reported unauthorized launch sequences and temporal anomalies. Jensen and I were on the response team, arriving within hours to find the crew catatonic, staring at their consoles with empty eyes, black veins visible across their entire bodies. They were alive, but unresponsive, their minds apparently trapped in some other state of consciousness. We couldn't save them. All we could do was document what had happened and try to prevent it from happening again. The incident reports kept coming. Every few months, somewhere in the global containment network, a crew would encounter the entity. Most survived, some didn't. And with each encounter, the entity seemed to be learning, adapting its tactics. Early incidents had been crude, obvious manifestations, direct possession attempts. Recent incidents were subtle, minor temporal shifts, dreams that influenced decision-making, social engineering that turned crew members against each other. It was evolving, and we were struggling to keep pace. 1 year after Lima 9, I was called back to the facility for a follow-up assessment. Walking through those blast doors, riding that elevator down into the capsule, I felt every muscle in my body tense. The capsule looked exactly as I remembered it. Same consoles, same chairs, same red emergency lighting that could turn everything into a horror show. But the crew stationed there now seemed normal, unaware of what had happened in this very room. They'd been briefed on equipment anomalies, but not on the full truth. Only Sentinel personnel knew the full truth. I stood at the console where I'd tried to abort the launch, where I'd watched black veins crawl across the controls, where I'd pressed an empty gun to Jensen's temple in a desperate attempt to escape. The capsule was clean now, sterile, all evidence of that night erased. But I could still see it. The ghosts, the cold, Major Kessler's dead eyes. My own doppelganger smiling with my face. It was all still here, layered over the present like a palimpsest. Multiple timelines bleeding through. The facility commander who'd escorted me down cleared his throat. "Lieutenant Carver, you okay?" I realized I'd been standing frozen for several minutes, lost in memory and perception. "Yeah," I said. "Just remembering." He nodded sympathetically. He didn't know the full details, but he knew something traumatic had happened here. "Ready to head back up?" I took one last look around the capsule, at the place where I'd died and not died, where I'd been replaced and not replaced, where I'd saved the world and doomed it simultaneously. "Yeah," I said. "Let's go." But as we rode the elevator back to the surface, I felt something shift. A pressure in my skull, a momentary double vision, and suddenly I was seeing the elevator shaft as it had been during the incident. The cables frayed and broken, the car stuck halfway down, no escape possible. Then it snapped back to normal, the smooth ascent continuing. My infection acting up. The entity reaching across time to remind me it was still there, still watching, still waiting. Back on the surface, I filed my report and caught a flight back to Sentinel headquarters. Jensen met me at the airport, took one look at my face, and knew. It tried to connect again? I nodded. We'd both experienced these moments, brief intrusions where the entity seemed to reach through our infection and show us things. Alternate timelines, possible futures, threats, maybe, or promises, or simply the entity trying to understand what we were through our own perceptions. "It's getting stronger," Jensen said as we drove through DC traffic toward the unmarked building that housed Sentinel's operations center. "Or we're getting weaker. The infection, it's progressive, Trent. Every month we see a little more, feel a little more disconnected from normal causality. Eventually, we'll be like those Wyoming crew members, conscious but trapped, straddling multiple timelines at once, unable to function in any of them. She was right, and we both knew it. The Colonel had been honest about that from the beginning. Our immunity was temporary. The infection would eventually consume us, transform us into something that wasn't quite human anymore. The only question was whether we'd learn enough about the entity before that happened to give the next generation of Sentinel personnel better tools, better protocols, better chances. That night, in my apartment in Virginia that didn't feel like home anymore, I sat at my desk and wrote this account. Not for any official report. Those were clinical, objective, stripped of emotion. This was the truth, as raw and honest as I could make it. What happened at Lima 9, what we faced, what we did, what it cost. Because someday, someone else is going to sit at those consoles 60 feet underground, and the entity is going to try again. And they deserve to know the full truth, not the sanitized version in the official reports. The black veins under my skin pulse as I write this, visible in the dim light of my desk lamp. They're spreading, up my neck now, beginning to branch across my jaw. Soon they'll reach my face, and I won't be able to hide what I've become. Jensen's are worse. Hers have already reached her hairline, creating patterns that look almost like circuitry, like she's becoming something other than human. We have maybe 6 months, the doctors estimate, before the infection reaches a critical threshold and we lose our ability to function in this timeline. 6 months to document everything we've learned, to train our replacements, to contribute what we can to the research that might someday break the entity's hold on our reality. It's not much time, but it's what we have. It's what we chose when we decided to join Sentinel instead of taking the easy way out. Because here's what I've learned in the year since Lima 9. The easy way out doesn't exist. You can't unsee what we've seen. You can't unknow what we've learned. The entity is real, it's waiting, and it will eventually find a way through. Maybe not in my lifetime, maybe not in the next century, but eventually. Unless we find that permanent solution the Colonel talked about. Unless we figure out how to close the door completely, to sever the entity from our timeline once and for all. That's the real mission, not containment. That's just buying time. The real mission is understanding the entity well enough to end its threat permanently. And that means people like Jensen and me, people who've been touched by it and survived, have to push deeper into the horror. Have to let the infection spread a little further, see a little more, understand a little more, all while maintaining enough humanity to bring that knowledge back to people who can use it. Sometimes I wonder if we're still at Lima 9, still trapped in that capsule, still living through that endless moment where the missiles launched and didn't launch, where we died and didn't die. Maybe everything since then has been a hallucination. My consciousness fracturing across timelines, creating an elaborate fantasy of Sentinel and research and purpose to avoid confronting the reality that I'm still there, still 60 feet underground, still watching black veins crawl across the console. But then Jensen calls. Or I see another incident report from another facility. Or I feel the infection pulse under my skin, and I know this is real. As real as anything can be when you've been touched by something that exists outside of normal causality. This is my life now. Documents and debriefings, theories and nightmares, watching myself slowly transform into something that might not be human anymore. All in service of protecting a world that doesn't know it needs protecting. The Colonel told me yesterday that they're close to a breakthrough. The theoretical physicists have developed a model that suggests the entity's connection to our timeline could be severed using a precisely calibrated series of quantum events. Not nuclear detonations, but something subtler, more surgical. It would require access to technology we don't currently possess, but the math is solid. There's hope. Maybe. But I also know that the entity is listening. It's always listening. Through every infected person, through every facility in the containment network, through the very quantum fabric it's trying to tear through. It knows we're working toward a solution. And it's working toward its own solution, finding the right crew, the right moment, the right alignment of circumstances that will finally allow it to break through completely. It's a race, essentially, Humanity's knowledge versus the entity's patience. Our mortal lifespans versus its timeless existence. Every day we learn something new is a day we're closer to winning. But every day the entity studies us, adapts to our defenses, is a day it's closer to winning. And I'm standing right at the intersection of that race, infected and aware, human and becoming other, watching the finish line approach from both directions simultaneously. If you're reading this and you serve in the Strategic Missile Force, in any of the silos or capsules or command centers of the global nuclear arsenal, know this. Your duty is more important than you've been told. You're not just a deterrent against human enemies. You're holding back something far worse, something that's been waiting since before our species existed, something that sees our extinction not as tragedy, but as necessary transformation. Stay alert. Trust your instincts. If you feel a sudden drop in temperature, if you see movement where there shouldn't be movement, if your instruments show data that seems impossible, don't dismiss it as equipment failure. Report it. Follow the protocols. And if you see black veins, either on yourself or your crew members, remember, you're infected, but you're not lost. Not yet. You can still choose to fight, can still choose to hold the line, can still choose to protect the world above from the horror below. And if you fail, if the missiles launch despite everything you do, know that it's not your fault. The entity has been perfecting its approach for decades. It learns from every encounter, adapts to every defense. Someday it might succeed, but that day doesn't have to be today. Not if you fight. Not if you refuse to give up, refuse to surrender, refuse to accept that humanity's extinction is inevitable. So if you're asking whether the story I started with, the night at Lima 9, the ghosts, the launch sequence, the entity, if you're asking whether that really happened, the answer is yes. Every word of it. And it's still happening right now, in facilities just like Lima 9 scattered across the globe. Officers just like me and Jensen, sitting at consoles, watching for signs of the enemy that no one's supposed to know exists. This is my testimony. This is my warning. This is the truth they never wanted told. And the entity is still listening. If you've made it this far, thank you for reading my testimony. The truth needs to be heard, even if most people will dismiss it as fiction. If you've experienced anything similar, if you've served in these facilities and seen things you couldn't explain, I'd like to hear your story. And if you want to follow my journey, and Jensen's, as we document what we're learning about the entity and the infection, subscribe to stay updated, because this story isn't over. It's just beginning.